Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show, I'm pleased to announce the long-awaited return of the incredible Mr. Savage, author of the incredible series Nightmare of Winter and the Memories of Summer. Big thank you to Mr. Savage for penning this next update. I don't know how many hours he covers at work every week, so we really do appreciate the extra effort to bring us this wonderful, wonderful series. As ever, guys and girls, you know the drill. Please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Memories of Summer, Part 3. Let's get straight into that. Stephanie opened her eyes, feeling as though her skull had been lit on fire from the inside. She stood for a moment trying to remember anything, before realizing she wasn't standing. More, she was tethered to the trunk of a pine tree. The chains padlocked to her wrists weren't overly thick, but she found her strength was withered. All she could recall was calling Tyler's phone, and then blackness. She hadn't noticed the intruder. She'd had her back to the kitchen door. The muzzle flash didn't register in her vision before the .45-70 round slammed into the back of her skull. As she struggled against her bindings as the cold feelings of blood pooling at her bare feet brought a new sense of pain and confusion into her mind. She lifted her leg while craning her neck. Her assailant had cut her across the left femoral artery, but hadn't managed to stabilize the wound. She had lost a vast amount of blood before her body had sealed itself. She needed to feed to regain her strength, but being chained in a place prevented her to do so. She had no idea where she was or if her attacker was coming back. Her only hope was that Tyler might find her sooner rather than later. As the early twilight of dawn shone through the gloomy, overcast sky, dimly lighting a thin canopy above her. Mika carried himself on battered wings, embarrassed at his folly with a massive wolf. He had regained his natural strength. The wolf should have been an easy prey. Instead, he'd found himself fighting for his very life at the jaws of the ferocious predator. Here he was, the scourge of the ancient world, devourer of gods and titans alike, made a mockery by a simple werewolf. The only explanation to this unholy beast had to be a Wahila, his own mortal enemy. Wahila had either reincarnated into this werewolf, or this beast carried the divine touch of the remaining 5. The 5 gods who cast him into that grave for the time unending to rot. He would have his revenge on all of them, the 5 and this new enemy. He needed to consume more, he thought to himself, as he seethed with gluttony. His wings folded as he landed upon a grazing cow and engulfed the creature whole before carrying forth to the other dozen of the beasts on the small field. The early morning was shattered with the blast of a shotgun, the buckshot slamming into the demonic creature. Mika turned before assailing the man. 2 blasts rang out before the shotgun hit the earth. The unholy monster made his way about the small farm, consuming every living creature, from the pigs to the man's family, and then took flight, leaving almost no trace of his crime. Tyler stared into Zach's eyes. The hunter returned the stare, steely, grey eyes boring into the glowing red eyes of the monster before him. "Where the fuck is my wife?" Tyler's voice erupted through his mind. "She's alive for now, Wolf." Zack returned without the slightest tremble in his voice, his hand closing around the rubber grip of the titanium-bonded 10-inch-long hunting knife strapped across his lower back. And Tyler's paw flashed like lightning, dislocating the hunter's shoulder. "Don't even think about it. Do you take me for a fool, boy?" Zack winced at the pain. He saw only one way out of the situation with his life. He raised himself from the ground, crossed the asphalt, and seated himself on the passenger side of the Ford Ranger's bench seat. Let's get on with this, Wolf." And Tyler, he said nothing. He watched the man with a cold, merciless stare. Here he took his human form and dressed himself from his toolbox. He kept his hand close to the grip of his Smith & Wesson Model 10-8 38 Special revolver. He seated himself in the driver's seat and depressed the clutch before pushing the shifter forward and left into first gear. "Take it to the vampire, but you'll help me kill that winged motherfucker and let me walk when it's all done," Zack said without taking his eyes off the road, unfolding ahead as the light drizzle began falling from the lightening early dawn sky. Lightning flashed in the distance as the air went stale, and Tyler nodded and said, "I will see about that." Mika wheeled through the dreary morning sky, sifting through the low clouds above. One of his prey were near. He could feel her. He could smell her blood. He banked to the west and dropped to the treetops. Ryan Kelly was approaching Tyler's home. I was pretty far from town in a quiet section of forest. Neighbors were fairly close, but not intrusive. He took a left from the main service road and then another left onto a country road. He rounded a corner and passed the first road before turning right onto a short connector road and followed the dead end. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Tyler's lifted Scottsdale and Stephanie's black 68 Chevelle were both parked facing the house. Tyler's Ford Ranger was missing, but Ryan figured he'd had to work a bit later than usual. He exited the truck and noticed the front door was slightly ajar. The smell of blood hit his nostrils and both his police and predatory instincts went into overdrive. He plowed through the front door and into Tyler's spacious home, and as he rounded onto the kitchen, he clenched his fist and teeth simultaneously at the spattered bloodbath painted across the kitchen sink, counter, and cabinets. The high-caliber bullet hole leading outside and the telltale blood spray pattern confirmed his fear. He saw drag marks on the tile leading through the back door, which showed the minuscule signs of professional, forced entry. And he followed them and found her, chained to a tree by her wrists. She was healed but too weak to talk. He offered the vampire his wrist after slitting it with a field knife, and she drank his blood as he moved his wrist in a circular motion to keep the flesh from healing. Ryan sensed something unnerving as he gripped the chains that bound her. He gave a mighty snatch as the sharp twang of shattering steel pierced the gloomy morning silence. He grabbed Stephanie gently around the waist, bracing her across his shoulder before carrying her back to her home. Mika watched the White Wolf assist the vampiress before he turned and wheeled away on silent wings. He flew back into the dense woodlands north of town, back near the lake, and he wheeled through the forest, silent as an owl. A large buck burst from cover and took off on a sprint, not nearly quick enough to outrun the predator folding its wings to assail from above. Mika seized the creature and subdued it in his grasp. He placed his mouth near the nostrils of the buck, which flared in and out with the creature's desperate breathing. Mika breathed forth, delivering an unspeakable horror unto the unknowing creature, before releasing it to sprint away gracefully into the thick of the wilderness. Mika took wing and soared back to do his business with the great wolf, The buck continued running forth into the deepest meadows of the forest, towards other deer that made up the population of the local herd. Tyler loosely focused on the road as thoughts raced through his mind. A light drizzle began splashing against the windshield of the Ford Ranger. Lightning flashed in the distance as the wind gusted through the trees bearing late summer leaves. In the passenger seat, Zach opened a small bag of powder. He poured a mixture of salt, sulfur, crushed amethyst, silver, and ground hemlock into the gash on his forearm. He dripped 2 drops of the rattlesnake venom and a single drop of bat's blood onto the mixture before whispering a few words in a language Tyler didn't recognize. Purple and white flames danced as the wound closed without leaving a scar. "You're not exactly human, are you?" Tyler mused. "What led you to that opinion, Wolf?" "The fact there's a witch in my truck, walking around acting as if the other supernatural people don't deserve a undisturbed life." "A witch? I'm not a... Whoa! What the hell is that?" Zach stammered, pointing at the vortex moving towards the truck, head on. Tyler slammed the gear shifter into neutral before jamming the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt as the twister barreled head-on towards the pair. Zach was going to pieces in the passenger seat as Tyler killed the ignition. The werewolf stared in awe at the violent monstrosity moving ever closer to him as lightning flashed all around the sky. Other than the freight train-like roaring of a tornado, the rest of the world around him was calm and silent, the air almost stale. He felt tranquil as the hunter rushed from the truck and dove into a nearby culvert. Zach stared on at Tyler as the werewolf slowly walked forward into the heart of the twisting column of wind and debris, as though it were nothing more than slipping into the trees. The twister began to glow with white light as flames whipped around its mass, and slowly the whirlwind dissipated, and Zach saw Tyler, a 6.5-foot tall man, looking into the face of a half-wolf, half-man being standing 20 feet tall. Wahila was garnished in a buckskin loincloth with a golden band around his left bicep, and from the band hung 13 flaming phoenix feathers. The Wahila spoke to Tyler in strange tongues he couldn't understand. The hunter sensed tensions as the air filled with static electricity. And suddenly, as the god struck down at the werewolf end, it was clear. The battle quickly ensued as Tyler remained in his human form, quickly evading the blows of the great wolf. Zach drew his twin blades but felt himself thrown to the wet earth. Suddenly, the weight of 1,000,000 universes was crushing the air from his lungs as Thor laid his warhammer across his chest. "Not your fight, Nephilim." Thor's words carried through his mind. Tyler ducked and dodged, left, then right as mighty flaming fists hammered the earth around him, shattering the asphalt and setting sprays of mist rising into the air. He seized the moment and used the recoil of the god's wrist to send himself into the position before the massive attacker's face. He unleashed a mighty kick that connected with the Wahila's left eye and felt the toe of his work boot pierce the cornea of the beast. Wahila roared as he fell from the force of the blow. The monstrous god rose to face the black flames of the werewolf's transformation. A sinister growl tore forth as Tyler locked his glowing blood-red eyes with the god before him. Wahila braced against Tyler's tremendous blows as the tables turned. Outweighed, overpowered, and losing the advantage of the high ground, the god switched into a defensive mode, giving flight to the werewolf's attacks. The pair traded great earth-rattling blows upon each other, but the advantage, it was clear. Tyler was far stronger and faster than the god. Golden ichor flowed from the wounds that grew ever thicker on the wolf god. Tyler's black flames scorched the white flames of the Wahila, mingling as they grappled. It seemed a lifetime had passed when finally the big wolf's jaws closed around the throat of the god. What is given cannot be taken, Tyler thought as he crushed the life from the god. He devoured his opponent along with the remainder of his godly essence. And Tyler could feel the power swirling within his body. He smiled his wickedly predatory grin as he dodged the attack from Thor. Tyler quickly twisted and rebounded, dodging more attacks while breathing blasts of scorching black flames at his assailant. He reached out and swiped the chest of the god, tearing jagged claw marks into the unearthly metal that made up the chest plate on Thor's armor. One swing ended the thunder god as he stood on his hind legs and gave out a howl that ripped through the air and trees and caused the earth beneath his feet to tremble almost in fear. Zack stood dusting himself off after gorging himself on air after what felt like an eternity beneath the impossible weight of Thor's hammer. He looked at Tyler's great dwarfen form tinged in red aura over a golden haze. Black flames danced across his dark fur as the drizzle picked up again. He stood in astonishment at what he'd seen his once enemy do. Tyler reverted back to his human form once again, clothing himself once more, and the pair returned to their silent drive as before. Zack suffering far too greatly from shock and awe, and Tyler too enamored to speak. And pulling into his driveway, Tyler took notice of Ryan's truck blocking his space. He quickly parked and leapt from the truck, and he began to demand Zack to know where Stephanie was. There was a different scent on the air, the scent of a human female. It was reminiscent of some event in his past, but slightly different. He quickly froze, sensing a new danger on the air. He weighed his options and then moved forward. Instead of entering the house, as any normal attacker would expect, he instead slinked around the side towards the backyard while watching the windows for movement. He rounded a corner with Zack in tow at his rear. The first sight he saw was both Stephanie and Ryan handcuffed and blindfolded on their knees, and with two big soldiers standing with large caliber weapons trained on their skulls, execution style. The next action to occur, before he had time enough to fully register the situation, was a hand slamming the degeneration serum dispenser into his torso. A hand attached to the arm wrapped a digital camouflage leading to a breast patch that read C. Hoffman. Below, a pair of fierce grey-blue eyes and jet black hair pulled into a tight bun. Claudia Hoffman reeled away as Tyler struck forth, swiping at her arm with a powerful blow, his eyes smouldering red with fury. While the serum was having little effect as he made a surge forth onto his assailant. But before he could make any advance in momentum, Celeste Hoffman's Ord 454 Castle exploded point blank at the base of his skull, knocking him forward and off his feet. With a 300-grain depleted uranium-tipped tungsten core, bronze-jacketed round bouncing off of his now indestructible skull plate. He hit the dirt and whirled around, looking Claudia's twin sister in the eye. He advanced on her before freezing as he heard the simultaneous clicks of the soldiers turning the safety off on their rifles. "I figured that would get your attention, monster," Claudia rasped at him in a mock sultry voice. Her sister Celeste composed herself, coming to terms with the fact that the world's most deadly bullet fired from one of the most powerful revolvers on the planet had failed to end the beast before her. "What the fuck do you motherfuckers want?" Tyler growled. And Claudia chuckled slightly. "To make you suffer, wolf." She snapped her fingers, and the soldier behind Ryan pulled the trigger on his weapon. Ryan was blown from his knees, face first into the grass as he began to writhe and scream through his gag. His veins began to glow bright orange as though they were filled with liquefied steel before he went limp and turned to ash that fell upon itself. and Tyler trembled, his rage swirling inside of him. His eyes began to glow bright blood red as his muscles tensed. He stood still, knowing he couldn't make it from his position through one enemy and deal with the two more before one of the two men could end Stephanie. He remained still, his hands shaking, staring into Claudia Hoffman's eyes, with a look that would be deadly to anyone lesser. A strange, vibrating static enveloped him, and he saw it in his mind's eye, as two twin bolts of lightning flashed from the heavens, decimating both of the men in a deafening roar of thunder. A strange, vibrating static enveloped him, and he saw it in his mind's eye, as two twin bolts of lightning flashed from the heavens, decimating both of the men in a deafening roar of thunder. "Impressive," Claudia murmured. "Before you attempt that on either me or my sister, you should know that I've fitted your bride with a brand new piece of jewelry." And Tyler looked at a silver band fitted tightly around Stephanie's throat. "You see, Wolf, your little vampire is fitted with a special collar linked to heart monitors worn by both of us. If one were to fail, it would result in the detonation of enough Semtech to vaporize every fiber of her being. And likely everything else within a 20-yard vicinity." Celeste spoke in Tyler's ear from behind, her hot breath teasing about the nape of his neck as her velvety voice strung his hearing. Zach, unconscious after the swift bash to his skull, courtesy of Celeste's revolver, as she leapt upon him from the roof, began to stir behind her. Celeste saw the action through her sister's expression and whirled, dodging Zach's sword before wrenching it from his hands. "To think I would let someone so weak into my bed. What a foolish girl I was in my early 20s. She mused before slamming the blade through his torso. Zach sank to his knees and looked up into Celeste's eyes as she leveled her revolver between his eyes. When did you become so cruel, my dear?" he whispered to her with a smirk. She drew the trigger, firing full into his face. A single tear slid past her cheek as his body rolled backwards, splaying across the lawn, and began glowing much like Ryan's before it turned to ash. "Quit being so sympathetic towards our enemies. Your farmer paramour abandoned the mission and went AWOL." Claudia coldly glared at her sister. "But perhaps it was for the best, seeing as we need this weapon to combat an even greater threat than our little revenge scheme," Claudia said, moving forwards towards Tyler. He instantly recoiled as she laid her hands across his crotch. She chuckled. "Seeing as we have him by the balls, in a sense." "Don't fucking touch me, whore!" Tyler growled into her face. "I'll do more than touch you, if I please," she boasted to him. "You are currently property of the United States Special Situations Task Force, so long as you want your bimbo vamp to exist with all her atoms intact." "Then what are you intending me to do?" Tyler sneered at her. "You've met our little avian issue, I would suppose, at this point. You are going to lure that freak back to your home turf, and you're going to handle that issue for me." "My home turf?" Tyler questioned. "You know the place where you took my father's life nearly 6 years ago." "I made your father a promise." "Is that so?" "Yeah, I promised him that when I got out of my predicament, he was the first item on the menu. I'm going to extend that promise to you and your sister." "That sounds like foreplay to me, werewolf." Claudia smirked before grabbing him around the throat in a chokehold and with her knife against his jugular. "When this is all over, I'll repay you tenfold for your crimes against my family. Remember that, you motherfucker." Tyler simply smirked, knowing he'd rattled the bitch's cage pretty hard. A Black Hawk swung low through the trees before alighting in the large backyard of the home. Stephanie and Tyler were escorted onto the craft before it whisked away with the observant Mika starting to trail it from far above. Claudia spoke quietly into a satellite phone, thinking no one could hear her words over the rotors and the engine, but Tyler's hearing easily keyed in on her voice. "Scrub it all, remove the extra vehicles and level the house. Make it look like a gas leak or something. Put 2 similar corpses in the master bedroom and make it known to the coroner to keep it by the book." Tyler lowered his head towards his lap in frustration and anger, choosing to bottle it up while he rather wished he could simply go nuclear on the pair of fucktard twins pulling the strings on his life. At that moment he wondered why he always had to be a shit magnet. Fucking zombies, government experiment mutant wendigos, government agents, winged nightmares, methed out killers, power-hungry deities, and all manner of psychotic, irritating bullshit seemed to always come running towards him out of nowhere. And when all he ever wanted was to live a normal-ass life without all the insanity. He sighed, trying to mentally prepare himself to go back to the exact place where all of his nightmares resided. Back to Derek's grandpa's property. Back to that now radioactive wasteland of strewn ashes of the damned and heroes alike. He thought to himself that he wished he'd just listened to his old boss and had just held off for a different weekend. A small voice spoke in his mind. "Then you'd never met that beautiful woman you spent so long with now." He smiled, but with a few tears brimming at his eyelids. It all seemed for naught. It felt like he couldn't save her this time. These insane demonic heathens now held them both captive, and he saw no way out of this situation that ended with Stephanie being alive. He resigned himself that if she was lost in this endeavor, that he wouldn't allow her to die in vain. He'd end both of these vixens and go about hunting their entire chain of command, if it meant waging a war with the entire country. Tyler felt the chopper begin to descend as the air around him took on a heavy feeling of radioactive death. He glanced through the window as the soldiers donned radiation gear. The big pond started to come into view, the great earthen mound that was the remnants of the Guardians, as they rested fused together in an eternal slumber, waiting to be called upon by gods who were almost half their number now. He shivered a little on the inside as the memories of that unofficial war began to wash over him. The living nightmare unfolded inside his mind as the thousands of glowing blue eyes of the Horde marched across his memories. Those big blue eyes of the Wendigo, towering above him in a nearly invisible aura, loomed in his consciousness. And he had vowed to never return to this hellhole so long as he breathed. But now the skids of the Black Hawk were coming into contact with the scorched, polluted soil of the barren wastes. Wastes he once couldn't wait to journey into. He felt bile in the back of his throat as the big doors opened, and he looked out into the late afternoon horizon in awe of the immense devastation that in essence he had partly caused. Wow, 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 wow. Suddenly another one. Wow. Absolutely chest-pounding and riveting stuff there from the incredible mind of Mr. Savage, exclusive to the DMT Forest of Fear channel. Once again, brother, thank you so much for penning this update, and it's so nice to have you back with us, back in action, and I certainly look forward to any further work from yourself. Well, guys and girls, another one bites the dust. Of course, as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. If you're an aspiring writer, or would just like to have a crack at things, like myself, please do get in touch with me at the usual email as on screen, which is dmt.forestofear@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. Hope everybody's well and happy, trying to keep fit and focused during these testing times. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.